Okay, so are you able to see that clearly?
Yes, I can see it.
It's not blocked by any other panels. I'm just bringing up so I can see you as well, but hopefully that's not obstructing the screen. So this is going to be about my particular take on individual development, which is not quite how other people see it, and possibly is an expansion of what has been so far been thought of as um, the Graves and spiral dynamics perception of what individual development looks like and how it happens. So, what I want to present is a set of perspectives which go beyond traditional spiral dynamics and talk about the way in which I like to explore this in workshop or training terms, which is really to see that this is not just a theory. It's not just a theoretical perspective. It's an experience. It's about how we engage with the stages from inside and how the developmental process shows up in us uh, as we as we go through it, both in the sense of our development as young people, as infants and children, and our further development when we're in adulthood. So, typically, what we get into when we're talking about spiral dynamics has a lot to do with how we think and why we think what we think. And underneath that is a deeper sense of who we are as individuals, who we are as biological beings, what it is for us to be embodied in our uh, sensing and our relationship with the world and how we uh, build our way of being in the world. And so there's a context which is the underlying kind of biology and emotions, and then there's the surrounding context. What is it that's around us as we develop, and what is the exterior to which we're relating as we form our being and our perceptions of the world? So this is more than personal identity and more than what maybe people have seen as development in the past, because it is relational. It is about an ongoing interaction between us and uh, everything in the world that we have a relationship with, everything that we interact with. So it's very important to me that we get beyond the sense of spiral dynamics as a ladder of development. I don't see it at all as that, for all that it's a reality that as we expand through the stages, that there is a sense of increase and a sense of something new coming in, that we get more bandwidth, we get more awareness of complexity, but not to see it as a ladder in the sense that often people think they're kind of doing a rung at a time and moving up one by one. It's much deeper than that, and it involves much more in terms of the whole stack of our stages. And so, what is it that creates our human journey through that stack? And how does it happen? How does it unfold in us? And what contributes to that? And what's going on with the stages in terms of what we're relating to in how we see the world around us, and what we're most paying attention to and connecting with. And then how does all that impact what's going on internally? How's it showing up in your biology, the body itself, what's happening that you can look at as being coming from our brain, and what's developing in that sense of our relationship with our context. So the picture on this slide, yes, we're looking at a development which starts with being really tiny, but the other part of the picture is the person who's on the end of the arm, who's holding this baby. And so the relationship between our growth from being small to becoming adults and kind of holding a much bigger context in which parenting would sit as just one element of that process. So as we go through the training and the workshop, what we're building up is a picture of the nature of human experience. So what is it that makes us who we are, and what can go well with that, and what can maybe go wrong with that, what can block our development and inhibit that development. And so it sort of relates to the context of the change states as we encounter them when we talk in level 1, about how in any stage of our development within the spiral model, we can hit a point where we fail to develop any further, where we become blocked at a stage and can't move, where we maybe become temporarily held in that stage, and that there are things that we need to unwind if we're going to get beyond the sense of being arrested and caught by the barriers of the development of our developmental process, whether those are internal or external barriers. And so where does the possibility of change show up if we can resolve those barriers? And the sense of when things are going ideally, when it's going really well, then we are always in a position to move into higher level functioning, to expand our bandwidth. And so what is the nature of the conditions internally and externally which support that openness? And so one of the things I'm going to talk about in greater depth than I've done before in this workshop, and what I'm going to support us all to experience in a new way, is the significance of fear and control. And that has to do with the way in which Graves described all the first tier as being subsistence levels. And so how does fear show up in the different levels, and how does that relate to what we do as humans in looking to control ourselves or looking to control others? And the other thing I want to say more about is where SDI has to look at the nature of something which is coming up a lot in current discourse, which is around what trauma is, and how does that relate to more kind of ordinary levels of development, which maybe we're not talking about trauma, but we're talking about something which is nevertheless an emotional impact that we respond to, and that can get stuck in the body. So all of this is presented in a context of seeing who we are in terms of multiple layers of both our interior and our exterior. So getting beyond the tendency to kind of think of the brain or of how we work psychologically as a set of just kind of wiring conditions in some kind of internal computer, to recognize what's going on in the way our bodies function is deeper than that, that we have the basis of our biochemistry, which varies individually. We have the nature of hormones as communicators in the body, so that what's going on is not just in the brain, it's happening in the organs, and the communications with our organs are mediated uh, by the chemical messenger system that uh, drives all of that. We have the influence of our underlying individuality in terms of temperament and typologies. Where does that fit? And then what do we do that in a more kind of performative sense? We know from many different angles and theories that things like breathing and posture are important to how we show up in the world and what we can do to support ourselves, or to support um, coaching clients in how do they shift what's going on? How do they work with and through a block? So breathing isn't just a, a way of kind of getting into calmness. It's also the root of so many techniques, which are about how we make change, how we support our internal change. And then we have the habits of thought and being that we've built up through our lives. We have the different kinds of neurophysiology, and there's much more awareness now of neurodiversity. We have the way that brainwave rhythms change as we develop uh, through our infancy and childhood, and how they impact then on how we function as adults. And we have capacities like our internal use of imagination and intuition, and our cognitive structures, which then kind of arrive on top of all of that. So our tendency to think of spiral dynamics very much in cognitive terms actually has a lot beneath it. And we can really get in and begin to explore that and unlock it and understand how uh, all these different interior features contribute to that. And outside of that are all the things that are also present in the world, which people will have different awarenesses of depending on what they've encountered. So I kind of start that picture with what comes through to us from our ancestry, which may be what's explicit in the family or what's semi-conscious in the family. And it may be some things that are much more in the deeper field of family being, and that shows up for people who've done family constellations. We have the individuality of our genetics, which kind of shapes us all, and genetics is not something which is fixed. Uh, Anybody who's come across Bruce Lipton's work knows that that's something which also is unfolding in present time according to its relationship with how we think, believe, and feel. We have the ways that people's experience begins in the womb, and some of the things which might come through in who we are, even pre-birth, and then in our experience of birth. And we then have the stuff which is maybe more visible in our usual perception of the spiral and the stages of the development, which is okay, what happens when we're cared for as infants? What happens in our families, and what happens in the purple stage as we create our family bonds? And how does parenting and discipline affect that? And then on top of that, how does education and socialization and culture affect that? So this is a very rich picture, all of which inhabits the experience and the conversation that we can have and do have as we go through this training, and as we see the impact of all these different layers on who we are and how that affects us, and how it affects the people we may be working with and doing coaching or leadership development with, or who we are interacting with in our own relationships and work lives. And just to give a little bit of a flavor of this and how my reference to fear and control, how I'm kind of currently seeing those in relation to how this presents itself through the stages of the spiral, is that fear is fundamentally about not feeling safe, and that there's something about the world which threatens us. So our early experiences can, the birth experiences, the connections we have with our mother's experience in the womb, we can come in with some underlying sense that is at the kind of deep beige level of it isn't safe. It's simply not safe to be. And so that has an impact on our entry into life and how we interpret the world from very early on. And it continues, that beige process continues as we're taken care of or not taken care of during our kind of helpless formative infant beige stage. And then as we begin to discover more of our sense of who we are and our bonds with our family, there's the question that begins to arrive of, well, how safe is it to be me? How safe is it for me to grow up in this world with these people? And then as we get into red and begin to explore our our kind of assertiveness and develop a sense of the I that we are in the world, and that brings forth what I want and what I desire, and it may not be safe for us to express that in our environment, and so that too can become one of the places where our fears and our interaction in the world is impacted. And beyond that, what I want and what I ask for, there may be rules or responses to that. And those too can give us a sense of it's not safe for me to fully express myself and inhabit the world as it is. And this is kind of where we begin to see what we know from the kind of traditional Graves perspective, that we do the dance between I'm going to express myself and I'm going to hold myself back in order to fit in with others. So, that can be thought of as suppress self, or kind of inhibit our self-expression. And that continues into orange, because if we do know what we want, ask for it, and get what we want, we still may get a disapproval or kind of negative responses from people if we actually get it. So this is a very, at one level, this is quite a kind of rich and potentially complex basis for discussion. At another level, it's a very simplistic presentation of that. There's a lot that's going to sit inside this that uh, we learn about as we go deeper into our own journey and our understanding of others' uh, journey. And when we're not safe, we either have to control ourselves or we have to control others in order to create the conditions that we are comfortable with. And that's something which is very visible in how people interact in the world at any level, from kind of fairly simple um, interactions and ways we kind of influence others, which are quite benign, all the way to fully fledged narcissistic uh, control. And so to see that as part of what's present in our internal development and in what shows up in the way that other people behave. So I want to say something at this point about trauma, because there's so much been coming up over the past 5 or 10 years about trauma and post-traumatic stress and kind of um, quite strong senses of large, not large scale, but large intensity of damage that can be done to people when they go through through war or sexual abuse or whatever. And of course, that's not our job. We're not, as unless you're looking at spiral dynamics from the point of view of somebody who is trained as a psychotherapist, it's not what spiral people do. It's not what we do as coaches or facilitators or leadership developers. So it's not our job to be psychotherapists, and it's not the focus of this workshop or this training to talk about psychological healing. And at the same time, what we know and what we will encounter and play with as we go through this journey is everyone does carry some kind of wound. Everyone is affected by things that were done to us by our, in our surroundings, by our parents, in our experience, that we've actually taken on and that we might still think about. We might still be experiencing something that we remember from our childhood or earlier on that kind of inhibits us, holds us back, and we're carrying that residual discomfort. And it helps us as facilitators or coaches or whatever to increase our awareness of that and our sensitivity to that in how it shows up in other people, and the kind of conversations that we can have, or the kinds of things that we can point them to in terms of maybe techniques that are there for self-help, that they can do for themselves, that will allow them to explore and unlock some of the blockages that they may experience. And I want to offer just one more sense of the context of all of this, that when you look at this slide on the left, there's this idealized sense of this is what the stages of development look like, or can look like, or should look like if we go through them in a kind of healthy and uninhibited or unblocked way, that each stage has the potential to emerge from the one underneath and to transcend it and to go into the next stage and explore what that next stage makes available. But then in practice, what we're looking at when we discuss this area of potential blockage or damage or the things that might happen to us as we're developing, that we can take a different perspective on this stack. So this first example is, well, what would happen if you don't get well supported to develop your internal purple? And what happens then is that we don't have a strong sense of our being, of being rooted in our existence and in our surroundings. And that then means that potentially any stage that follows, it's shown here as being paler in color because they will still possibly develop, but they won't develop with the strength and the power that they otherwise might have. So, we will explore more of the sense of what that notion of dynamic impact, either to the existence of a stage, the expression of a stage, or to its healthy and unhealthy forms as we go up through the spiral. And what does that do to us? What does it feel like? And how do we relate that to that, both from what we see and what we know of ourselves from within? So, this is a different perception that let's say you've got an excess of red in the system, and that then shows up as impulsivity, and it means that blue cannot be as secure and healthy. Maybe it affects the orange stage if people have, if their kind of strength of their eye also goes into the expression of their orange. And so that reduces the impact of the health in the WEE systems. So these are just examples, and there's much more of a sense of this as we get the full picture. And one of the things that I bring into the process is that we don't just look at this from the outside. So we do some inner journey work, some visualizations, some explorations, and we have some conversations which are supporting us as we go through to have more of a sense of, oh, this is how this lives in me. This is how I can see it has worked in me. This is how it's showed up for me. And these are places that I can see maybe that I made changes in the past and how that shift was, or where we, even as we're going, we see, oh, okay, I can see that for me, and I can see there's a potential change for me. So although it's not constructed with the intention of being a kind of a personal growth workshop, that thread inhabits it, because as we learn more about ourselves and others and the world, it would be very surprising if we didn't create some sense of a reflection in ourselves, and that might bring some, might reveal some things that are potential changes. So that's the context. That's the sense of the number of different threads which are woven into this workshop and training because it's both. It starts on November the 18th. We have the good fortune this time through to be hosting the training on the Value Match Academy. And what that means is that there's more ability for us to add in additional materials and make those easy to access, and to have interactions with each other through the Academy platform itself. So to have our conversations there and not to try and conduct them somewhere else like Facebook or email. So that's really it. If you want to get into what this is, the information is on the foundation website, sdifoundation.com, or it's on myspiralfutures.com website, and that would lead you to the PDF and the booking processes and all the things that are necessary to support you joining. And I've put here that because this is a fairly late video, if anybody wants to kind of join at the last minute, I'm very happy to discuss making payment plans available so that it isn't something that you necessarily have to have the instant cash available for, or to have to save up for a future workshop. So that's I think that's pretty much what I want to say. So I'll stop there and invite questions if there are any questions you want to ask. So your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, John. I like the idea that you've started to expand the model and bring in some different aspects. And, I've done family constellation, I've done holotropic breath work. I see the in utero stuff that, you're bringing all of that in. The impact of damage, impact of imbalance, I think is an important aspect for me to look at. I think I started looking at even ancestral stuff in red, in unhealthy red and unhealthy blue, in the level 1 course. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing all of that in. Is there any things in your mind around the lost system of initiation, meaning initiation from adolescence into an adulthood, and how that impacts the model? Have you ever brought any of that in?
It's not something I usually cover. I totally get the question. It's not something I usually cover in the way I kind of construct the training as a template, but it's definitely a potential conversation that could come in. It's a very relevant conversation to how that sense of rites of passage and how that shows up for particularly for teenagers progressing into adulthood and so on. It's an important part of that stage, and it's something that we could definitely include in the conversation as we go.
Yeah, part of me like just asking that question because sometimes I don't really show up as an adult. I think I drop back into unhealthy adolescent behaviors that really make it difficult to live in the world and to function in a healthy way. Even though I'm in some areas, a higher level of the spiral, there's still some wounds that in certain life conditions cause me to drop down. And that's what I'm looking for, the wholeness, is how to really bring a wholeness to myself in the levels where I've had some damage or imbalance.
I totally get that. And I mean, I think everything that I've been saying is kind of leading into that direction. Of course, there's a limit to how much of that we can explore
Yeah,
individually at depth, but it's a potential for, for the also for the buddy conversations that you can have and so on. I mean, I think what you're saying, I there's a strand to kind of to psychotherapy, which is known as inner child work. And that is something that I will refer to a bit as we go through because, um, yeah, most of the wounds that people carry are ones that they experienced in childhood. And so how we relate to the parts of ourselves where there's still there's still a little John or a little Stephen operating inside. And I think what you described as your sense of, well, sometimes that's, you show up as this wounded child. I think everybody does that.
yeah,
And so it's yes, it's definitely a part of it's a part of the whole context that we're talking about here.
yeah. Looking forward to joining the training, and I think even the training can help me see where um, there's some filling in that needs to be done that I can get elsewhere. But it brings an awareness. I think that's what came to me in the first level one was a greater awareness of some areas where there wasn't quite the fullness that I was looking for. Yeah.
Great. Well, I look forward to having you kind of experience and hopefully get a lot of what you're looking for in that. So thank you for showing up today, and
Yep.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
See you in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much,
All
John.
right. Take care, Steve.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.
I'm sure yours as well, in Britain, who went through World War I and World War II and the Depression. And those high levels of trauma, which were just much more than any of my contemporaries, quite frankly, experienced. As I talked to them as a child, nothing. And yet some of them seem to have developed so much resilience. And I just wondered if you had ever thought about the opposite of trauma, which is why aren't we developing resiliency, and what might we do to help people with that?
Oh, well, it's a great question. I mean, I think potentially it's a very big question. My perspective right now is a couple of things that relate to that. I mean, one is there's a kind of advantage um, of something like going through a war, which is that everybody goes through it together. And I think that means that there's maybe a different relationship with it and more of a sense of, well, it's all known in a way. You know what you're coping with when you're in the middle of the Blitz. Um, and my perspective on the really big question um, is that something has been happening over the past 25 years because of us um, approaching the second tier entry point, the kind of phase shift that's involved in entering something which is new and very different, which is that it always introduces turbulence. and the kind of obvious cluster of conditions that everybody is dealing with, that there's a fundamental layer of anxiety which is now inhabiting kind of at a planetary level. And it kind of it was I found it interesting. I mean, not that Tony Blair is one of my great favorite people or an expert, but it was interesting. I heard a little fragment of an interview with him recently talking about the difference between when he came into power, which is kind of 25 plus years ago, compared with what it's like now for the new Labour government coming in this country. And the thing that he said is that there's a lot more anxiety. So, I just found it interesting to hear that kind of corroboration coming from him. Because he
And
did
I
get
think maybe your point about the bombs are dropping, that's so clear what my problem is, right? And one of the things I'm hearing from the States from a lot of people is something is so wrong. The life conditions out there, obviously things are failing, and we need more of a second tier approach, but it's not obvious what's failing, right? Because there is no enemy dropping bombs on London or New York, right? So it's very hard, that anxiety, as opposed to something physical that one can actually put a finger on and do something with, which seems to be a very different sort of situation.
Indeed, indeed. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to go into the conversation about the state of the USA with its interesting election coming up in 4 days' time. But yeah, it illustrates everything that you're saying. Any other questions? Anyone else? Anybody wants to pick up? I'm very aware of how quickly I went through that material, but that was kind of my intention was to give a flavor of what's going on rather than to kind of get into the detail of that, because there's other workshop series that sit within that material besides the ones which relate to spiral dynamics potentially.
John, I have an interest in the difference between how an individual and how a collective goes through the different stages, in that for an individual, trauma can either be a change of environment that pushes them forward, or it could be something that actually blocks them. Whereas, does that also happen within a culture, say?
I would say yes, it does. I mean, obviously, in this presentation, I was focusing very much on individual development. So a lot of what I'm thinking about in relation to something which might not be, well, it might or might not be trauma, depending on how the person experiences. But, the things that other people do to us and how we take them on and how we respond to them and what that does, that's kind of one layer. But I think what you're talking about in terms of what happens collectively, that's not necessarily at the kind of severe level of going through a world war. It's also present in just what we always talk about in spiral dynamics, which is, well, what is going on in the life conditions. So when we're all experiencing that the economy is tightening, or we're all experiencing that we're being told that the planet is going into meltdown, all of those things, at whatever scale you talk about, it could be local. You could be people could go through a local flood, as Spain did recently, and as parts of England did in recent months. So, I mean, yeah, all of those things I think show up in various degrees of kind of visibility and kind of subtlety.
Will you be looking at the difference between a change in environment that pushes somebody through to the next level or actually blocks them? Have you noticed, is there a pattern around those things?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
Did I make sense of the question,
well,
John?
kind of. I mean, it's like we can't avoid looking at that because that is also built into the spiral. It's built into the
Yeah.
journey. It's built into the nature of, well, what are the conditions that kind of cause us to realize that we have to adapt and to step forward in that. So that's always present. And then the individuality of that is that Maya Angelou has just kind of popped into my mind as somebody who actually did go through trauma. And, you know, from my memory of her journey, she didn't speak until the age of 10, 11, 12. And then she became who she was. You actually don't know. You don't know what somebody's response is going to be to whatever the trigger is, whether it's big, because obviously her trigger was, you know, was a high abuse level, but you don't know even for more subtle triggers. Well, how are people going to respond? Some people. I'm also thinking of it. It's Eleanor Roosevelt's comment, isn't it? It's not only about what people do to you, it's about what you do with what people do to you.
Totally, John.
Okay.
Thank you.
It almost feels also like, Grace talks about things falling apart before the next, at a larger level, even before the next stage kicks in, right? And so some of that falling apart, if you look at Don's change model, some of it's almost required. Nobody changes if they're fat, dumb, and happy, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and so there's something about the need for something internal or external, often external, showing you a need for that change that almost seems like that sort of a catalyst is a very valuable thing for change. And yet it feels like it can be overwhelming. And I think nowadays we don't see a lot of health at any of the 6 stages. And so if there's no role model that one can look to, and like an Eleanor Roosevelt, and say, oh, that's how women should react to World War II and the Depression, right? If there's nobody out there that shows a healthy next level, then that's a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people will find their role models and some won't. I mean, yeah, I mean, I kind of get where you're coming from, but for me, it's more about the kind of the intensity of the cluster of conditions and what that's causing for people. And, you know, it's a choice whether you see that as catastrophe or birth pangs. And I tend to choose, and this is going way beyond the context of this particular conversation. But when I talked about the sense of a phase shift that's involved, I mean, I'm reminded of the story. I think it's in Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff, where he talks about Chuck Yeager and his experience of breaking the sound barrier. That when you go through what he went through was the first time he approached the sound barrier in his plane, he thought it was going to fall apart and he pulled back. And then his kind of courageous step was that he decided to go again, and he went through that turbulence. And what he said was, when you get the other side of that, the plane responds quite differently when you're the other side of the sound barrier. It actually it becomes kind of lighter and more responsive and easier to control. So it's a choice, or maybe a stance of optimism or pessimism, whether you look at what we're going through right now, because I certainly think that going from tier 1 to tier 2 has all the characteristics of a phase shift. And I wouldn't say that that's as true to the same degree of any of the earlier stages, the transitions. I think we are going through a phase shift, and I'm optimistic about where that will be, but realistic about the level of discomfort that it might represent as we go through it. And that's Graves too, because Graves always also said that, well, this could be massive loss of population or whatever. And, kind of take a deep breath saying that, but that's the reality or it's a potential reality. It's how I choose to see the reality. So I'm kind of conscious that I'm going on. I'm happy with.
Can I just ask one more question, John?
Go on.
I'd like you to.
Could I stop you?
Well, you can, John. I might come back to you with an email later, but
Go on.
This I wanted to ask you to take the opportunity to do a sales pitch here. Why should I do this course?
Oh, because there's a kind of a richer view of the spiral and of individual development on the spiral that I'm offering now than I've ever offered before. And that I would say that this is going to take many people into places that they haven't thought about yet, but which are actually very significant for both how they are as individuals and their internal journey, and for what's possible in their practice with others. I mean, that's in a way, that's the point of it. So, I mean, if it resonates with you and you can see that, oh, there's something here for me, then obviously, it would be wonderful to have you on board, and anybody else who kind of hears this. All very welcome.
So,
thanks, John.
So, Jonathan, can you give us a list of the exact dates that you have scheduled?
I can. I mean, if you go onto the Spiral Futures website and you download the PDF, they're all in the PDF.
Okay.
But it's sort of they're Mondays 2 weeks apart from November the 18th. So that's, I think, the 2nd and 16th of December. And then it's something like the 13th and 27th of January, 10th of February, 24th of February, something like that.
So you're not doing them on days other than Mondays?
No, I've set up a pattern so that it's kind of easy for people to remember where they're supposed to be and when.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's probably it. Thank you all for turning up. It looks as if I'm going to be doing this again in a week's time or so, and in order to capture a full recording, either that or I'll just talk into the ether myself and make that the recording. We'll see. But anyway, thank you for being here, and yeah, if you want to join the training, that will be wonderful to see you there. So thank you.